The content of this podcast includes topics that may be difficult for some people to confront or discuss. These conversations can be triggering. If you are underage, please speak to your guardian before continuing.
The more a parent puts limits on their child, the more that child will love their parents. And I see that all the time. I see that in my office constantly.
Welcome back to another episode of That's an Issue, and I have a confession to make. Yes, I am addicted. I have a challenge going on in my life, and I think it happens to a lot of people, but I'll be open about it. If you know me, you probably realize that I suffer with this. I am totally 100% addicted to my phone. I'm addicted to the internet. I'm addicted to social media. And while it's great, I also feel trapped. And whether it's just me saying this, or there's a lot of people out there that have this challenge as well, or they know someone in their life that are challenged by this, and who better to talk about the pressures and addiction and just how to navigate social media better and smarter and healthier than Dr. Pelcovitz. There's a million conversations we could have had with Dr. Pelcovitz, and we asked him, what's the most common challenge that you're finding that people are struggling with? And he said social media. So we said, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it with how to help our kids. Like, we see this tunnel of like, they're doomed potentially if we don't take care of this, because we kind of, at my age, I'm 30, didn't really grow up with social media and kind of got introduced to it and still so addicted. Imagine, our 1-year-olds that literally know how to unlock our phones and swipe to their favorite app. It's wild. What could we do for them? Is there something to do? There is. So listen to this episode, and also for yourself, you'll hear how I personally get some directions and help what I could do. And if you're like me or know someone in your life struggling with social media or just on their phone too much, then this is an episode for you. And the Clutch Chicks do a great job. And here is the Clutch Chicks conversation with Dr. Pelcovitz.
Mental health, relationships, those are loaded topics and something that affects every part of our lives. But we aren't having enough open conversations about it.
And that's an issue. Okay, welcome back to That's an Issue. We're honored to have Dr. David Pelcovitz here. For the audience that doesn't know your background, can you perhaps give us your bio?
Sure. I grew up here in the 5 towns. Actually, I grew up in Far Rockaway, to be specific. And I, in terms of my academic background, right now I'm a professor at Azrieli Graduate School, Yeshiva University, and an area of specialty or subspecialty is an area of the impact of social media, the impact of basically the changes in everybody's head and in their interpersonal relationships, with the changes that have come out, especially since the advent of the iPhone. So
cool.
Wow. So you've done research into that. You've treated a lot of clients who are dealing with these types of issues. Like, where does your expertise come from?
So it's the most common question I'm asked when I go and speak in different parts of the world. It's where people's heads are at. It doesn't matter if it's Jewish or non-Jewish, observant or non-observant. People everywhere seem to be really have a high level of anxiety and of concern and questioning about how to handle, like, what's the right age for a child to have a smartphone.
That was one of my main questions.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to know.
I'll make up an answer. We'll figure it out. So I've been doing this work for a while now. I got my doctorate from Penn in, wow, I'm afraid to even think how long ago. It was over 40 years ago.
Wow.
No, in 77, I think. It's a long time ago. So,
impressive.
Anyway, so
let's dive right into, what is social media? Like, what is the definition when someone asks you, is social media good or bad? What falls under the umbrella of social media?
Okay, so I mean anything along the lines of using everything from Instagram to TikTok to Facebook to whatever it is that is out there in a way that is leading to very, very scary kinds of trends. I don't want to awfulize it too much, but there are very real trends out there that weren't there before, where people are very worried about, for example, the fantasy that, what adolescent girls fantasize about relative to previous generations. They're more likely to fantasize about fame, being famous. They're often much more likely to be insecure because they're always looking at superficial kinds of measures of feeling like they belong and are connected, that are not at all really connected to the sources of happiness. Sources of happiness are family, friends, and faith. These kids have much more in the way of a lot of insecurity, and it's heightened by the fact that they're constantly living in a world where they're trying to see sort of the fantasy of what their friends are going through. And we all know that what's posted on Instagram or what's posted on Facebook is the best picture and the best life, and very different than what in fact is going on in all the parts of their life that aren't curated that way.
So we could directly link rises in anxiety to social media, in your opinion?
Yeah, in my opinion, yes. Yeah, I think that there's some really important research that's been done. Where you see these bar graphs just showing that it looks like a bomb hit in the year that the iPhone got widely distributed in the form that it is now. And as soon as that happened, and everything that goes along with it, depression rates went up, suicide rates went up, anxiety has shot through the roof. It's very, again, I hate awfulizing and making it sound worse than it really is, but it's real,
Interesting.
Yeah.
So sorry.
No, absolutely.
In a community where social media is, I guess, not as common, like let's say a more right-wing or yeshivish or hasidish or however we want to categorize it, would we then see some lower rates of anxiety and depression?
That's what you would expect. Right. But I could just share a quick vignette. I hadn't thought about this for a while, but a number of years ago, I was asked to give a talk at a right-wing all-girls high school about this topic, and I was told by the people who were running that school that we don't think that any of our girls have smartphones. We just want them to hear from a secular guy like you.
You see,
however secular Torah Das graduate is, but we want to hear from a secular guy like you because they'll believe somebody with your background more than they'll believe us. So start talking to the kids, and they're not necessarily telling me anything that I think is really being necessarily honest. So at some point, I asked to kick out all of the faculty, minus one person to be there with me, so that I'm not alone in a room with 400 young women. And as soon as they were convinced that there was nobody there to listen to them, I found that they were all laughing. They said, "Are you kidding?" They said, "We think we don't have smartphones." First of all, many of them were using their phones on Shabbos. Many of them had a phone. They had multiple versions of different phones, and there was no real way for the people they looked up to in their school to really know about what was happening. Once they started opening up about it, it was very clear that they were nervous about it. They wanted more in the way of limits, more in the way of being able to know who they could talk to about this. So it's real what's going on there. And then, by the way, every time I talk about this topic, my wife yells at me. She's great. She's the one who keeps me honest always. And she says, you're making it sound like there's no positives. And there's so many positives. You know, there's...
Right, this medium is social media to a certain.
Yeah, right now. Look
Right
what we're
now.
doing. Look what now, right? It's, you know, it's, you know, a source of unbelievable kindness and chesed and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And connection in a way that is really, really inspiring. So it's, you know, Rabbi Hirsch many years ago said, the key in dealing with any new technology, because he was even talking about that then, is to find a balance between isolation and inoculation. And the challenge is, how do we inoculate our kids, you know?
Right.
Right. So that was my next question. Is there a difference between adults using technology versus kids?
But before we jump into that, which is a great question, I'm just still struggling with what is the problem that we're solving for?
The problem is, what the research seems to be showing is that there's, since the advent of, you know, of everything that came along with social media, there's been a very significant rise in anxiety, in depression, in suicidality, in general unhappiness.
And that's a causal link to...
There's, when you look at some of the people who are doing the research on it, they make a compelling case that it's causal, but even if it's just correlational, which would not, you know, mean the same thing, it's still something very real that we have to deal with. You know,
Right.
we may never know exactly how to tease that out, but yeah, that's an excellent point. But
So
yeah,
we're trying to solve for the... Is it abusive use, regular use, sometime use?
yeah, I think it's like another excellent question.
That's a good question.
We're not talking necessarily about addiction,
Okay.
but we're talking about use that by the typical adolescent's own definition is problematic. Can I share with you an experience
Sure.
that opened my eyes to this? Because I was not fully open to the intensity of what's going on. Two quick experiences. One is I went to Los Angeles to give a talk on this topic, and I was invited by Debbie Fox, who's a real activist there, a fellow mental health person who we work carefully on issues tied to actually sexual abuse, which is not what we're talking about here necessarily. And she showed a study that she had done, like a large-scale survey in that part of the world on the West Coast, that asked kids, tell me, basically said, what's going on with you in terms of social media? Is it at all problematic for you? And a high percentage of the kids, over half of the kids, said if we could only get those visions out of our head of inappropriate pornographic images that we saw, and we can't get them out of our heads now. If we could only get back the time that we wasted being up till 3, 4 in the morning, texting back and forth between friends with important messages like, you up yet? You asleep? You know, like just going on and on with examples of how it was stealing their sort of peace of mind in certain ways. And where it becomes more problematic is when we look at some of the research that really does seem to show that when you look at what it's done to parent-child interaction, we often don't know what we don't know. Most people don't understand that in parent-child interaction, there's a very problematic kind of challenge where there's a study called the Still Face Experiment, okay, which is an amazing study. It's been replicated, I think, in 80 different parts of the world, and it's a very simple study. Harvard professor has parents play with, I believe, a 6-month-old child, And when they're playing with the 6-month-old child, it turns out that at a certain point, as part of the experiment, this very responsive mother is asked to present a still face to her child. I think it's for a total of I don't remember exactly what, but it's no more than 2 minutes. And the child is trying to seduce her like little babies do. We all know what kids that age do, trying to catch her eye, trying to get her to smile, doing all the tricks that babies do to try to get their parents' attention. And she presents a still face. She shows absolutely no reaction for a couple of minutes. And at first the baby starts to cry. Then the baby starts calling to her. And the saddest part, and often when I show this to audiences, this video, is at a certain point you see the baby give up. The baby sort of gives up, and it's really a metaphor, or actually a direct analogy to what's happening out there. So it's subtle. It's not like these kids are going to be destroyed for the rest of their lives, but it's something that I find that when parents are made aware of it, they often respond with tears and a much greater understanding of like, wow, I have to really tune into this.
I mean, if a kid
So this is because the parents are using their technology too much?
Yeah. If you look at some of the studies, it turns out that kids are actually complaining more about their parents' technology use than the other way around. And it's a sad thing to see. The first thing I do when somebody walks into my office and I'm seeing a client is I make a big show saying, oh, you're here, let me shut my phone off. Okay? Because, by the way, the research shows that just the presence of my phone on my desk, even if it's shut off, means that I'm seen as less available, which is pretty amazing.
Wow. So you have all these personal problems such as anxiety, depression, and then we also have the interpersonal relationship, especially parent-child, which is a disconnect.
And it's the core of everything. So if I could, the vignette I started to tell you about, and then I distract myself all the time, but it's something I think that you might have heard me speak about. It's the program first in Chicago and then in Cleveland, and since then it's been replicated in different parts of the world. Actually, I just committed to going to South Africa to do a similar program there with other people. Yeah, so the program was amazing. What they did is they had some big funder to fund bringing in some superstar rabbi guys. Universally respected rabbis. So it was the head of the Mir. It was just the Rabbi Elephant. It was Rabbi Brudny. It was very, very respected superstars in the yeshiva world, and they were and they asked me to come as the comic relief, and they. What hit me was, first of all, they did a tremendous amount of work in those communities to get people ready, to ask people. It was called a focus program. How do we get people to focus? How do we make real change so this isn't another hit and run? And they, who had been behind the famous internet Asifa in City Field, they said that was an abysmal failure. They themselves said, we were behind it, and it didn't work. We have to come up with small, actionable items. And the amazing experience that everybody there had was that the adolescents who were there were so actively excited about doing this that they, first of all, they were mesmerized by the whole program, by the whole idea that, and they were in a lot of pain because they feel that their parents are often absent. They sit down at the dinner table and their parents are off, online. What was amazing about it was done, and the kids asked for more programs like that. They asked for follow-up.
Wow.
And the same thing happened now in a number of other places. So, and again, you don't know what you don't know. But once you're made aware of it, I find that most parents are very anxious to do the right thing and very anxious once they have that awareness to just get simple recommendations on what to do in terms of trying to get better, connection on this.
Great. So can we get some of those simple recommendations?
Well, not for us, but for
no,
other,
for the other
people listening.
Other people, right. By the way, I wherever I go, and I don't want to make it into this a big thing, but I travel a lot. I travel a little too much. I love being local, like for this, okay? Wherever I go, the number one question asked by adults and kids is, how do we handle this? What do we do? And there's some very basic recommendations. It's basically, number one is that you come up with getting buy-in from your kids. You want to get buy-in. It can't be just telling them, you can't do this, you can't do that. My understanding of the research is that an authoritative disciplinary style, meaning hearing them out, being firm, but also being clear to the parents that we want, we're going to work with you on this. What do you think is reasonable? In study after study, everything from pornography use to staying up till all hours of the night to being mean to friends online.
And gaming, that also is included in this?
Gaming is part of it, but I don't find gaming to be sure. There's some evidence, for example, that heavy Fortnite players can become, addicted. There's that little dopamine squirt that you need, and it seems to be associated with more subtle problems of hergel, of habituation. So in World War II, 1 out of 4 soldiers, American GIs, could not kill the first time they were in combat. They just couldn't kill. It's not so easy to kill another person. So they had to have a special training program to teach these soldiers how to how do you kill, to teach them how to kill. And it was a very successful program. So when the Vietnam War came, they were all ready with the same program again. We have to teach these Vietnam guys men and women, how to kill. And they canceled the program almost immediately, because by the time Vietnam came, there was no need for it, because there had been such habituation with the average Vietnam soldier having seen thousands and thousands of murders online.
Wow.
And that it gets at you. It gets at your soul. So that's one thing. The other thing is just the key to modeling. There's a magnificent thought that was shared by the Baal Shem Tov. The master, the well-known Baal Shem Tov, and he was quoted. Actually, the Piaseczna Rebbe, who was the rabbi in the Warsaw Ghetto, said that when we say multiple times every day in our prayers, Va'avadetem mehera, one of the ways of saying that is get rid of the rush in your life. Mm. And in a number of places, when you ask a large audience of people, what's your main impediment to your kids feeling connected to their spirituality and to their religion, usually what parents say, by a large percentage, number one, is a lack of stillness. Our kids need a certain amount of stillness to be able to develop that inner kind of depth. So, 4-word prayer, and then I'll bite my tongue. 4-word prayer going back to over the millennia. Hashem yatzileni mipizer hanefesh. So what was said then was, God save me from the fragmentation of my soul that comes from multitasking. But yet it's hard not to multitask. We love multitasking, because it's our brain is wired to want to multitask. There's nothing crazy about it. We just have to learn how to control it. And once in Cleveland and once in Chicago and some other places that have done this, they did this. It was successful beyond anybody's dreams. It has to be revisited.
Right, so what kind of things were said at this program that you think made it successful?
Yeah. So the number one thing that was said was, first of all, they had a lot of a lot of basic work done in the community to get people ready. So they did a lot of legwork for it ahead of time. They went for very small change. Very small. They didn't say, hey, get rid of this. Right. The first thing they said, which was beautiful, they said, hey, you know something? Here's what we'd like you to do first, is whenever you're talking to somebody, face to face, eye to eye, heart to heart, because, our hearts bounce off each other when we're making eye contact with somebody, just for that period of time, however long that conversation goes on, put your phone in your pocket or shut it off and get it out of sight. That's all we're asking you to do, is step one. And everybody, not only did they do it, but they immediately saw a change in the quality of their relationships. Parents were told, we know that we can't ask you to.
So ironic.
I know. By the way, that was audio visual. I arranged for somebody to to call me.
Well, also in your defense, you're a very busy person and you're making time for us to do this. You have a real life.
Right, but I apologize. I did just shut it off now. So what was that? What
you were saying that you put it away out of the room.
Yeah, so just simple. Put it away. And kids in particular loved it, but also parents saw it. And parents weren't told, don't text, don't give up texting when you're having dinner. That's asking too much. Mm-hmm. We just want you to take, 15 minutes where you shut your phone off and only have one-on-one with your kid. There's an organization started by one of the Zackheim, it's a well-known family,
Mm-hmm.
Zackheim family, who does a lot of amazing work. One of the Zackheims has an organization called MUST, which stands for Mothers United to Stall Technology. Same idea. Mm-hmm. We're not getting rid of technology altogether. We're just saying that if in your neighborhood kids first get their first smartphone by 5th grade, why don't you as a community, we set up a WhatsApp group, and everybody's community agree to put off getting a smartphone for 1 year, and you're not going to get pressure from your kids because we're going to go for 100% participation. And they've been doing that. You can only do it probably till high school, and then, you have to move on to letting kids be inoculated. But those are the kind of things that tend to work. But the key is small, doable steps. They tell guys when you go to synagogue, okay? Leave your phone. They set up lockers. Leave your phone in a locker. Simple, basic things, and it surprisingly nobody expected it to have the reaction. Now, by the way, is there backsliding after a while? Sure.
Right.
Yeah. So that's the thing with the psychology of change. You have to keep going back to it, and yeah.
Right. Make it more of a habit.
You have to make it to habit, right. Change only works when it's something that is basically something that we somehow ritualize, that we bring it into, and also the key is consequence. So what happens if your kid violates your rules? So there, what's talked about is you find the key is to be unemotional. Remember, it's authoritative parenting that works the best. And the consequence you have is you take your kid's phone away for a couple of hours that night. Not more than that. And if it happens the second time, then maybe most you take their phone away for a day. That would be the most severe. Consequences that work best when it comes to technology is brief, unemotional, and logical. Those are the 3 guidelines in terms of parenting. And that seems to be what works best.
Which platform on social media seems to be causing the biggest problem for, I would assume, teenagers?
Yeah, let me throw it back. Let me hear what your experience is, because you're working. You're working
with
in.
teens.
You're in the front lines. Let's hear.
Trenches.
I'm thinking.
You're in the trenches. Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of the like social comparisons and that kind of stuff, I would say Instagram. But in terms of like time wasting, I would say TikTok. Like I think depends what problem you're looking for, what the answer would be.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I think.
And are you seeing any dangerous things happening on TikTok that you sometimes hear about? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you give an example?
So without going into detail, because I really can't.
You have the best stories, and they have to be confidential. It's not fair.
I'd say like the best sort of like disclaimer I could put out there is that on any social media app, you could get links to get another social media app. And like that's where the danger comes. So like someone has, let's say, Instagram or TikTok, okay, whatever, you're watching people dancing, like great. But then when something pops up there, and then you click that, and that gets into a whole world of predators and all kinds of other like bad stuff that can happen that you're not looking for when you go onto TikTok. Like that's not what you're looking for, but you happen to click that and then get sucked in that way. There
was a horrible story from a few years back where they had a sting done by, I think, the FBI, because on Fortnite there were some men, who were seducing young boys who were playing Fortnite because, arranging to meet them and then to, have sexual contact with them. So they did a sting. And among the men they arrested were 3 Orthodox Jews from a well-known ultra-Orthodox neighborhood in New Jersey. And it was shocking to everybody,
terrible.
But it was horrible. But it's frightening. Is that common? I don't know. We don't know, but it's.
I don't think it's so common.
Yeah.
And how do you monitor such, platforms?
So no, the key is rules without relationships equals rebellion. It's all in the context. It's monitoring in the context of a good relationship. Your kids are much more likely to be there with you. You have to work with them, and you have to let them know. You have to let them know. Look, one of the deals, if we're going to let you have this smartphone, is we want your password, and it's not like reading somebody's diary. And they may say, you can't do that. It's like a diary. You can't do that. So you say, okay, fine. We'll do it for X amount of time. We're going to monitor it this way. And if you earn trust by being responsible about it, we could eventually give you more and more freedom with it. But, the key is it's all about the connection and a real deep kind of connection. I have a daughter who lives in this neighborhood and is a therapist here. And she is always talking to my grandchildren about things like, let's see, do you see anything online? Anything that was problematic? One of the favorite games that my grandchildren have playing with me is something called Moral Dilemma. We speak about the moral dilemmas they encounter on a typical kind of interaction online. There's something called the online disinhibition effect, where you tend to be much crueler when you can't see the hurt look on somebody's face.
Ooh,
and
interesting.
So you have to talk about that. And you'd think that they'd see it as preachy. They love it. They fight with each other on who gets to walk me to and from shul to play Moral Dilemma. So it's.
Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? How do you play? Like,
the way to play. We should definitely market this. Okay.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. I may say. Let's talk a little bit about what you do is during the year. What do you do during recess? During playtime. So let's say it's a 9-year-old grandson. So then I'll say, and what happens, how do you handle it when there's certain kids who you know are real klutzes? I said, when I was a kid, I would fall asleep in the outfield, during a baseball game. And I'd get them to talk about it and then talk about, well, how do you handle it? In other words, the eye sees only what the mind knows. Once you make it clear to them, this is something to think about and talk about, they'll talk about it because it's where they live and they worry about it. They don't want to be remembered as being a not nice guy, or a not nice girl, So those kind of things speak to kids. It's called an existential theory of mind. It speaks to their developing values and developing what they really care about. And kids, they seem to want to do it. So I find it to be, to be something that sounds preachy, but it's not experienced that way by them.
Mm-hmm. Right, because you're having it in a conversation. You're asking
in a conversation
them, right.
about and about stuff that matters to them. Another thing to remember about how do you transmit values to your kids, it's what my understanding of the psychology of transmitting values is, is what do you care about? What do you get emotional about? What do you spend time on? So if at home you're spending a lot of time talking about the new construction, we're talking about things that, aren't necessarily, the kind of depth we want to develop in our kids. If instead you talk about, how upset you are when, there's cruelty on the part of one kid to another, or when kids are left out. It's so easy to socially exclude kids. It's so easy, like this time of year now that we're, the days are, so let's say we have long Friday afternoons still. The key is what happens when everybody in the class is invited to go to the pizza store, on Central Avenue here on a Friday afternoon. And you leave certain kids out because they may be a little annoying, or they may be a little quirky, a little bit on the spectrum or whatever. And the only way your kids are going to learn to not do that is you have to talk to them about it. You have to talk to them about it, and you have to ask them about it. And I find that most kids, once they know that, especially if you get their parents to be on board with you, they start to,
think about it.
To think about it and to act that way,
Really cool.
So.
Okay, so going back to the question of when a kid should get a phone.
Yes.
So you first gave the idea of the parents have to band together in like some kind of pact that we're all not going to get a phone before a certain age, which is a great idea. In terms of development, like, is there a better age? Like, I was sort of asking the question before about the impact of social media on adults versus kids. I would think it should be different because the brain is not developed.
Yeah.
I would think the longer you push it off, the less negative impacts it would have.
Yeah, there's all kinds of strong evidence that the younger the kids get into this, the more impact it's likely to have on their brain development. And especially if you're messing around with the dyadic, sort of the delicate balance of parent-child interaction. If kids are seeing that instead of looking at them, when you're supposed to be having a conversation with them, they're looking down, and you're looking down and answering emails or taking calls from work, which is understandable. But if kids start to see that, it's the worst way to model for them. So in terms of the right age, basically, many people say there's a large-scale study done by Common Sense Media, which is a great site, because they're driven not by commercial interests, but driven by, they're really, based on, their stuff is based on research and solid understanding of what's going on. And they find that the vast majority of parents recommend putting it off as long as you can for a kid to get a smartphone. And once they do, it leads to almost, constant fighting between parent and child. And they say, look, you're going to have to get your kid a smartphone at some point, but you have to wait for the right time. You have to wait. The longer you can put it off, the better it's going to be. And kids aren't going to like it, but that's okay. Kids, there's, and it's going to depend on the kid. One more thing I have to remember to say. Everything depends on the kid, I have 4 kids. At one point, we were going to 4 different yeshiva dinners because they were going to 4 different schools because each kid needed a different school to go to, because they're based on their own unique needs. The Kutzker, well-known rabbi, going back, to the, was it the 1800s or whatever, he said the following, which I love. Here's what the Kutzker said. He said, there is nothing as unequal as the equal treatment of a child.
I like
That's
that.
Yeah, that's refrigerator worthy. Back when you could hang things up on a refrigerator.
Now I'll just text it to a chat.
That's right, exactly. But again, there's nothing as unequal as equal treatment of a child. Each child,
Status.
It depends on their temperament. I've had kids. You look at them sideways, and they won't have an impure thought for the year. Just because they're so sensitive to wanting to do the right thing and to being good. And then other kids that, you just have to parent them in a totally different kind of way and be on top of them, but not in an angry way, and in a way that's all about the connection. So.
Fascinating.
Wow. So a lot of parents want to get their kids phones for safety reasons, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So it should be a phone just only for calling or texting. Like, it doesn't need to be a smartphone in that case.
Yeah,
right?
I'm so glad you raised that, because the reality is
so then why are so many parents not doing that? Like, what?
Because
everyone else is doing it. Like, what's the reasoning behind it?
I think there's a lot of box that could be checked on that. So part of it is because children, in terms of parenting style, and there's been a real shift in parents' ability to say no to their child. And it keeps getting more and more in the balance between love and limits. There's been much more of an emphasis on the love part and the bringing closer. And parents, for the last probably 30 years at least, have had a very hard time facing the frustration of their children. There's a great medrash, great Jewish thought, that says the following. It's talking about how you have to put limits on your kid. There's always hope. And don't pay attention to their screaming. It's okay. So our rabbis say on that, the more a parent puts limits on their child, the more that child will love their parents. And I see that all the time. I see that in my office constantly. Kids don't forget, I've been doing this for a number of generations now. So I had kids in my office having huge temper tantrums when their parents, took away their Platinum American Express card or whatever, and they went crazy. I remember. And now I'm seeing their children or grandchildren in that same office, and they'll say, "Remember when I was going crazy, when my parents started to get stricter with me?" He said, even then I was happy they were doing it. When they wouldn't allow me to go into Manhattan, on a long Saturday night, and I was going crazy, I deep down I understood it. And now there's no way I'm going to let my children do it or my grandchildren do it. So there's something, we just have to keep in mind the big picture like that. Yeah.
Kids actually like, rules because what you're saying is because it shows that you care.
It shows that you care, and they may not show that they like it, and they're going to convince you that you're the only, none of their friends have the same restrictions, and I have yet to meet that friend. Wherever I go in the world, I have yet to meet them, so.
Because they don't come to your office, that's why.
That's right, yeah. Yeah.
Do you find that some of the social media affects maybe women more than men? Or is it just that perhaps the institutions are more strict with men in our communities and they have less access?
that men who has less access?
I would think maybe men have, young teenagers that are male have less access than maybe some of the women because of just the rules in our community. Do you feel like?
Oh, I see. Not necessarily. Not
No.
necessarily. I hear what you're saying, but not necessarily. Actually, I think first of all, in terms of pornography use, there's very clearly my understanding is that it's there. I think boys are more likely to be struggling with problematic pornography use. But there's some interesting research that shows that, guess where Google Analytics shows where there's the highest use of pornogaphy in the United States? It's the Bible Belt. It's the the Bible Belt, people who are virulently anti-pornography. That's where there's the greatest use. Because, if I tell you, don't think of a pink elephant, what's the first thing that you're going to do? Now, the more right-wing part of our community is no different. They struggle. They struggle with use of pornography just like the people in the Bible Belt do. And, what we know works or has a better chance for is you have to talk about it. You have to talk about it. There's some wonderful websites now. I used to be a little, didn't quite know what to do with Guard Your Eyes. I thought, Guard Your Eyes, which is a wonderful website, has been doing unbelievably sophisticated work in terms of having all kinds of tools that could be used, including anonymous, like the equivalent of 12-step programs that kids could get help with if it crosses the line into addiction.
Fascinating.
That's interesting. Hold on, I had another question, but I forgot what it was.
Maybe ask a little about adults and social media. It was very kid-focused, which is great, but I'm just naturally curious about adults, how we could limit it.
Yaakov, do you feel like you're...
No, I'm totally addicted to social media. I'm addicted to my phone. It comes up all the time. My wife and I argue about it all the time. And I would love, some direction.
And when you say, what kind of sites are you often going on?
TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp is a big one.
And what does it do for you?
I feel connected.
Okay, so there's the positives that you're connected with it.
Entertained. Stimulated.
Right. Yeah. And our brains are wired in a way that we're always looking for novelty, and it could be a positive connection also.
There's definitely a lot of positive. But at the same time, I'd rather live in my phone than off my phone.
Really?
Yeah.
You'd rather live in your phone than off your phone?
Yeah.
Wow.
And what do you find works for that?
What do you mean?
What do you find works for living, for being able to have better find a balance? Because I imagine
cold turkey, just just putting my phone away, not even if it's in my pocket, it will end up in my hand. Right.
So it's access. The Talmud says that if you're having a problem with gambling, the answer is break the dice, which is a great imagery. So here too, it's also access. For example, just if I could go back to adolescence for a second, there's really horrific evidence of seriously life-threatening or life-ending accidents when adolescents who don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex are driving with their phone not in the trunk of their car. So the simple recommendation is there's now technology that could allow you to set things up so that your kid can't go in the car, and you monitor what's happening and what their attention is like and whatever. But also the best thing is to just make sure not let them have the car if they have their smartphone on the magnetic holder instead of in the trunk of their car. So access really does make a difference. There's some excellent recommendations. I could share with you a PowerPoint that has some very specific recommendations. It's called going from FOMO to JOMO. How do you go from fear of missing out to joy of missing out? Okay? And it has very specific recommendations based on some neurologists.
Can you share some of that?
Yeah. No,
I'm sorry for taking over.
You do it. Here, take it.
No.
No. Yeah. So it's basically things like having clarity about what your goal is. Real clarity. In other words, like get in touch with what's this all about. Having a way of tracking it, as one example. So we just had this podcast where we were talking about specific recommendations regarding social media. What the research shows is that some people will hear this and will say, oh, that's pretty interesting, but it won't make any difference at all in their lives. Another third of people will hear it and make some changes, but those changes will go back, as we're getting ready to come into the time of year where we're talking about the psychology of change and the tshuva process and all that. That's the second. But then there's the people who make ongoing, regular change that tends to stick. That third group, what it's all about is they could ritualize the change. You ritualize it. And it could be something as simple and as basic as I know that I'm much less likely to have very unhealthy foods if they talk about creating friction. Meaning, so I'll take the cheesecake. I have a real weakness for cheesecake, massive weakness for cheesecake.
Me too. I have a song for cheesecake.
Yeah. You have a...
Cheesecake with chocolate syrup. Cheesecake. No? Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
It sounds like you like it.
No, I like it very much.
Ice cream and sorbet. Not as good.
I didn't realize we were going to have a concert also.
Cheesecake is very good. I love cheesecake.
Yeah. So the idea would be, so if there's cheesecake in my house, so you create friction. So what that means is friction is I'll take it, I'll double wrap it in a plastic bag, I'll put a tie over it, I'll hide it deep in the freezer, and it means that by the time I find my way to getting the cheesecake, I have to really, really want it before I'm going to eat it. So you figure out a way to do the equivalent of the double wrapping bag behind the freezer just to make it just less likely. So those are the kind of things that might make a difference. But just remind me, and I'll share with you my phone.
We'll share it under the link.
Yeah, you have the link. Yeah, I'll share it right now. Yeah.
I recommend a book called Atomic Habits.
Yes.
Which goes through it's a bunch of different ways to make a habit stick.
Yeah.
And there's the making the good habits attractive, making the bad habits unattractive, like all these.
And it's
things
such
that you're
common
saying.
sense,
It's great.
Atomic Habits, but it really works.
It's a great
It
book.
really works. It's become,
I mean,
and
this
building
is more
it
like
into your routine.
but
Like
this is
it's
more
the
like-
routine is you come home, you're sitting down for dinner. The routine is you take your phone and you put it in a drawer and you close the drawer. Like that's just part of your
this
routine.
is more like CBT type of therapy, right? You're not going as to why we're there. You're just like,
the
okay, this is we're just
behavioral piece,
changing
Yeah.
how you behave.
Yeah. But then again, what do our rabbis say? Achar ha'pulos nimshach halavavos. Our hearts are drawn by our actions. So sometimes it's something as a simple action, which is the equivalent either of breaking the dice, or something along those lines, and it makes a real difference. So.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
This
so much
is
for coming.
My pleasure.
Really
Thank
great.
you. It was a lot of fun, and
Hope we're going to help a lot of people.
I hope.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Dr. Pelcovitz is larger than life, and we are so incredibly happy and thankful that he was able to come and have this conversation. But we'd love to have more conversations with him. So if you want to hear more from Dr. Pelcovitz, you can go on livingchaim.com and tell us what you want him to talk about. Or maybe you have your therapist, or maybe there's a challenge going on in your community that you want us to talk about. That's what this podcast is here for, to talk about the taboo topics that people are struggling with and they need help. and we need to talk about it, and not to like expose anything, but to really just work through it. Like, everyone could always use more help. And if we could use this platform to have conversations to help enlighten, enrich someone's life, it's well worth it for that. If you enjoy any of these episodes, share with a family or friend that would really enjoy it. It's, you never really know who doesn't know. And the more you can help someone, the better it is. So if you haven't yet rated us 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, go ahead, leave a comment on our YouTube video, hit a thumbs up. It really means the world to us. And if you are going through a challenge, you need help, you need direction, you don't know what to do, you could call our friends at reliefhelp.org is their website. They're incredible. We get so many thank yous for people telling us, wow, I didn't know about them, and now I know about them. And then vice versa. We have people like, oh, of course you're friends with Relief. They're incredible. They've helped me out so much. So give them a call. They're free. Their number is 718-431-9501, or you can send them an email at info@reliefhelp.org. Until next time, stay safe. Living L'chaim.